I'd been a fashion designer 36 years. Yeah, so quite a long time. Yeah, I mean, it's quite funny because I did my first bride in 1975, and that was Renee Forte, as she was, one of Lord Forte's daughters, and she married John Tadeusz. In fact, I had lunch with him about a week ago. So she was my first bride in 1975. So it's a long, long time ago, and that was a sort of V-neck, very tight bodice, and a sleeve, because it was a big Catholic wedding, you know, and 75. Daddy was very much, you know, it was probably in the Brompton Oratory or something like that. You will be covered, my girl. And then it had sort of tiers of taffeta. Quite a big dress. In fact, it's quite funny because I would still pull out a dress like that now. It works. Most brides want to show off their figure. Most brides have got a waist that's smaller than their bust and smaller than their hips. So most girls do go in there. And they like to show it. And that's usually, you know, the best part. I quite like the idea that it's quite modest. You know, my dresses are fairly modest. I mean, I can do bare just like the rest, but, you know, I think the symbolic side of a wedding dress, the blushing bride walking up the aisle, quite like that. You probably know that I was brought up by Bernardos. So unlike any normal person, I actually have a file written about me, which started from before I was even born with my mother, and ended when I was about 25. In fact, it went on and on and on. And I had access to this file, and there was a letter in 1957 which said, foster mother believes the boy will be a fashion designer. So that was when I was 7. So that's quite perceptive of my foster mother. Well, the reason why she thought that was that she was a dressmaker, which, you know, is another key to my future career. Mind you, my brothers and sisters didn't become dressmakers or fashion designers, so, you know, it was obviously in my genes. It was obviously going to happen. I didn't go and do fashion, as it were, until I was 21. In fact, I did, because I wanted to do it at 16. I wanted to go to Jacob Kramer School in Leeds, because I was up in the north. They said, no, get a qualification. And then at 18, I had a couple of A-levels, and I wanted to go to art school. No, get something you can fall back on. Go and train to be a teacher. So I went like a dutiful child and trained to be a teacher. And at 21, and when I finished teacher training, I decided, no, that's ridiculous. You know, I want to do clothes. So then I went to St. Martin's. I went to Ravensbourne, then I went to St. Martin's, paid for by Bernardos, I have to say. Bridal hadn't come into the picture really then. Everything I did was sort of glamour and dressing up. It was always that. But Bridal didn't happen really until I started my own business, you know, in 75 when I got my first bridal commission. And Bridal really was only a part of the business for many, many years. You know, we'd get 2 or 3 dresses a year, 4 dresses a year, sometimes more. It wasn't until the mid-80s where I started doing a lot more wedding dresses, when I was associated with Diana, Princess of Wales. And because one did sort of ceremonial clothes, if you like, for Princess of Wales, it was quite an easy step to making ceremonial clothes in white. You know, apart from the fact that people wanted to have dresses made by the designer who was dressing the Princess of Wales, they also saw the potential in, you know, what I did as for Bridal. When I'm designing my collections, I start off from the point of view of the technique in which I'm working. So I might be thinking in terms of something very soft and sort of, you know, like volants like this, which are just circles which are cut. Oh, it's a problem because you've got to finish all these edges and not make them wobble. Or I might be working on something like this, which are bias strips, which are stitched onto either silk tulle, or in this case onto silk organza. And this would dictate how the actual design worked out, you know, exactly what the design would be. Because I know the limitations of the technique, and I also embrace, shall we say, where the technique can take me in terms of the design. Now, obviously, a lot of things like this, where it's major amount of work, it can only be couture, because every time, you know, this goes from the table onto a machine, then off the machine to a hand finisher, you know, it racks up a lot of man hours, and, you know, the price has to show that. I start from technique and then build up from there. But I always like to keep the overall shape quite unfussy. So there may be embellishment, but usually the embellishment is part of the design. It's not superfluous embellishment. It's either the whole damn dress is made up of this technique, you know, which can be very, very expensive, or it's a section which moves from, you know, the bodice into the skirt. but it's integral. It's not just plonked on the top. Charlotte Rampling was always my muse, you know, Charlotte, because I made clothes for her back in the 70s. And it was always women like her, Jackie Bissett, Julie Christie, the English lot, who had that sort of confidence, but weren't flashy about the way they dressed, you know. I think that my bridal style has developed in the same lines, you know, in parallel lines as my couture, because I see it just as an extension of what I do. It's just a part of the whole Bruce Oldfield package. If, as I've gotten older, my understanding of technique and my understanding of fit, I mean, this is the thing about here, you know, we have got very skilled operators, you know, people who sew, people who fit, people who cut patterns, you know, and we can get it really fast. You know, people still say, oh, you know, this fits, and you go, yeah. Well, actually, the thing that most people say, which they say also at the couture, is this feels fantastic. And it's not because everything is lined in silk, because it isn't. But it's just the way, you know, there's no rough edges inside. There's nothing that's going to chafe. There's nothing, you know what I mean? But that's all to do with understanding and speaking and constantly talking to clients over a long period of time and understanding what it is that makes you know, a garment a nice experience. But as far as the design ethos of the house is concerned, the style of the house, it really hasn't changed. I mean, it's possibly gotten more sophisticated, but I can pull off a lot more now than I could 30 years ago in terms of, you know, delivering a design. Because the key to anything to do with design is whether you can carry it through. We can all, actually, I say we can all draw, we can't. I can. A lot of designers can't draw. But the idea is that a designer can draw, but then the drawing is a two-dimensional thing. It's got to be represented in three dimensions and also fit. And we can do that, and we've developed, you know, the skills and the team, you know, the framework of the business that can actually carry it out. I see a collection as something which evolves day on day, week on week, month on month. And it's only that once a year we have to distill all of those ideas into a cohesive collection which gives what I want to say, plus also gives choice to the bride. So, you know, from a marketing point of view, from a merchandising point of view, you've got to have enough to fit the various types of woman who's going to come in here, you know, the older, because we, you know, obviously we have older clients. I mean, I think our first customer here was, you know, a 42-year-old who was getting married. You know, that's young compared to me. So you have to do dresses which are alluring. I like the word allure. So they're alluring and they're sort of sexy but romantic and virginal yet enticing, you know, all those kind of words, you know. And you're aware also that there are people who get married in different venues. So they're getting married on the side of a beach. At the Dress in the Window, there's a young girl who was in Strictly Come Dancing last year who wants to wear that, and she's getting married on the side of a beach, on a beach, which is great. And then others are going to get married in big churches or synagogues or Greek weddings where the whole thing is over their head, you know, the crowns. You just think about all these different girls and have some. I mean, saying something for everybody sounds really naff, and it sounds like, you know, a bit of a potpourri, but it's not. It's just, you know, acknowledging the fact that, you know, all these different, you know, venues for weddings exist these days. You know, now the licensing laws have changed. When I decided to open this shop, I thought we've got to make some dresses that are a bit more affordable, because I know that the constant moan is, oh, Bruce Oldfield is so expensive, you know. And even in my own shop, you know, they come in the couture shop, they come in and they're quite pleasantly surprised. Okay, we're not giving them away, but you can get a suit for, you know, mother of the bride for under $2,000, you know, which people didn't, you know, they just thought everything was $6,000, $10,000, $20,000. We have that. We can have that. So we decided to have the three categories here. You have ready-to-wear, custom-made, and couture. So couture, it's obvious what it is. It's damn expensive and it's gorgeous. And it really means you get me, and we won't go into price because it's vulgar, but when you get over to a certain price point, you can have whatever you want. Basically, you know, we sit down and we chat, and I'll just draw until we get it right. And we have also some samples, because a lot of people, you know, can't visualize it. And then we have custom made. Now, custom made is almost like what the couture used to be, but we've just cut out some of the processes. So you get quite elaborate dresses selling between $4,000 and $9,000. So in almost every instance, you're going to get, you'll get away with the dress, the shoes, the veil for under 10 grand. And then below that, we have the starting point, which is the ready to wear, and those are from 2.5, 2.6 up to just under 4,000. And you get the same attention to detail, the same attention from the staff, whichever area you're buying in. I've been blighted by this misconception that everything at Bruce Oldfield is expensive. And yes, of course, we make expensive dresses, and we always have. But we also do things that are affordable, from ready to wear and from custom made. So you don't have to break the bank to come here at all. You just get a very good service and a very good fit. This is a calico or a toile, which has been fitted a couple of times already. This is at the final stage before it's actually going to be made. All the pattern pieces, which form, all of these panels, for instance, have to have the seam allowance taken off, and they will be all embroidered. When we're doing the bridal collection, it's rare that everything is drawn up and that is it, number one is going to be made, number two is going to be made. It's usually, I go, as things are happening to a dress, then things, they change, and you never ever present a drawing that comes out exactly as it is, because you, me, the designer, always wants to elaborate on it, or to improve on it, and that's what happens in the process. First of all, the pattern makes the pattern, and then we cut the toile, which the cutter does, and the seamstress sews up, and then we fit it on the model. And it's at that stage, really, the first stage, where we sort of all stand around and look at it and go, oh, no, perhaps, And changes happen then. But usually they don't change that much. It's usually more technical things, is that shall we make that go a bit more off the shoulder, or, well, no, because the bride, and then Sophie will say no, because she does a lot of fitting. So she'll say, no, because we get so many people coming in and they're saying, that let's do it here, and the girl can also let it fall off her shoulder later. So at least when she walks in the church, her mother's not having a fit. This is a calico or a toile, which has been fitted a couple of times already. This is at the final stage before it's actually going to be made. All the pattern pieces, which form, all of these panels, for instance, have to have the seam allowance taken off, and they will be all embroidered. It's a major piece of work, and because this is an asymmetrical dress, every pattern piece is cut. You have to cut each one individually, because normally, if a dress is symmetrical, you can just write on it, cut one pair, cut one pair, cut one pair. But this is cut one right side up, one right side up, one right side up, all the way around. So there's 16 panels in the bodice alone, just here on the top bodice. So each of those are going to be individually embroidered. It's a big job. The train, the skirt and the train are all embroidered. It's all embroidered organza. It's embroidered with roses. Neil and Arthur make the patterns from my drawings, and they follow the garment through the toile. It's cut into toile, and then every time there are alterations, every time there are fittings, then they need to make alterations to their pattern. A pattern maker can spend a week, maybe it's 2 weeks on one dress. If it's a complicated dress. I mean, it's the couture dresses that really do take up the hours, because we're starting from scratch on something that we haven't done before. So, it's as new to these guys as it is to me. Sometimes it is a question of tweaking the pattern after the first fitting, but often we make a basic shape first, just to get the shape of the dress and to get the fit. And then after that has to be then fiddled around. They're almost using that as the starting point to begin again. So, this is why it can be, and people don't understand, that their hours are money, I mean, I have to pay them. We all have to eat. So, so every time, they do something on the table here, the bride has to pay for it. Christiane's making an underskirt for a wedding dress, but in fact it's an underskirt which shows, because it just has one single layer of silk tulle over the top. So it actually shows the insides of the skirt. And this is a ready-to-wear skirt. So, but we stitch this bias strip of satin all the way around, so it hides the joins, and it makes a very nice sort of linear patterns inside. That's a couture bodice. This is all made by hand. The embroidery is done first, and then we lay over these strips over each seam, and then of course then you have to go in afterwards and fill in where anything shows, if there's any gaps. But you get a seamless job. But I mean, it's a couture top. This is another dress in progress. So the strips are made, bias strips, and then they're laid on one by one and stitched down. So you get the shaping of the body. So I'm going to do this, but horizontally on the rest of this bodice. And this will be a strapless dress. But this is that whole point of it being, works in progress, that it's not just a finished thing. So, I get this part of it done. This is all the embroidery is done by hand. Now it needs a good old steaming. This is a sample for spring 2010, couture. And so the skirts have been started, the embroidery is done, but now it's a question of working out how it's going to be, how the rest of the dress is. And it's going to be it's going to have the strips put on one by one. This is Sophie, who's in charge of all the hand finishing and manages the workroom and does fittings and does everything really. And also looks after work placement, young ladies. And here we're doing hand sewing on a few garments, the sample there, and this is a long evening dress version of the white bodice that was on the workroom. So this is where these bands are now sewn on over these gaps that are left when the embroiderers do the embroidery. So you get a rather gorgeous finish. This is Chris, and Chris does the cutting. He cuts out the individual dresses, and he does a marker first, which is he takes the pattern that Neil or Arthur have done, puts it on the paper, which has got grain lines on. It's very important that you have your fabric is cut on correct grain. And then all the cut work goes into an envelope, which then goes to the girls in the workroom. The next stage is that the dress is cut into the fabric and the embroideries are put in place, maybe it's just tacked on. The dress is tacked up for another fitting, and at that stage, we have to make, some sort of final decisions and final adjustments are made, and then the dress is finished. When I opened this place, it was not that long ago, suddenly all these people started ringing me up, and people that I knew who were sort of saying, we talked about, and so it's very much on the cards that we will offer for those who want it at the Bruce Oldfield wedding, where I will design the whole, come up with the concept for the wedding. I mean, obviously that's going to be a couture, custom-made couture thing, Because when I first mooted this idea to a friend of mine who's in advertising, he said, I said, I'm going to do this shop, and I said, I'm going to call it Bruce Oldfield Wedding. And he said, oh, great, that means you're going to do the whole wedding. And I said, no, I'm just going to do the wedding dresses and the mothers of the bride and the bridesmaids, and all the accessories, because we have a shoe collection and bags and all the accessories. And he said, no, you should be doing the whole thing, So there's that, and then possibly the idea of a wedding list as well. I mean, I'm assuming that people come here for my taste, and my style, and I do have a certain amount of, credibility in that area. So that's another area. And then of course, there's the logic. I just think it's quite funny because doing couture for 35 years or doing, designing clothes for 35 years, this is the first time that I felt this is a new business which has got a huge amount of possibilities in diversification, and I'm embracing it all.